This is Module 5, Lessons 12 and 13. We're going to review the problem set, which is very similar to the homework so that you can do the homework on your own. The first thing is that we have to measure these triangles. We're using customary, we're using inches. We need to remember that there are 16 spaces between each whole number, which means that each line is worth 1/16. So we're going to start by measuring right here. We're going to start on the end. We're going to measure the length here. When we measure the length of this, we see that it is 2 inches. So we're going to write that this is 2 inches. We'll write that down here away from the ruler. So now we're going to click on the ruler and flip it in the other direction so that we can measure the width of it. And when we measure the width of it, we see that it's 2 and halfway down, which is 8/16. 8 out of the 16. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So then we have our measurement over here is 2 and 8/16. We don't want to be working with big numbers later. We want to be working with smaller numbers. So we're going to simplify that. And it's the same thing as saying 2 1/2. So now these are both inches. And we have that area equals length times width. So we're going to do our measurements. And the length was 2 inches. And the width was 2 1/2. And when we multiply, we need to make sure that we turn things into improper fractions. So 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5. And we end up, we have to remember that there is a 1 under here. So when we multiply straight across, we end up with 10/2, which is the same thing as 10 divided by 2, which is 5. And it's inches squared. Notice the 2 right here is over the inches and not over the 5. And next, we go down to the next one. And we're going to move the ruler and measure it. So we see that we are 1 and 1 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. It's closer to the 12. So it's 1 and 12/16. We don't want to use such a big number. We want to simplify, so we can divide them both by 4, which would be 1 3/4 inches. This is a square, so we know that every side is the same, but we could actually measure it, and if you measure it, you'll see that it is a square, and this is also 1 3/4 inches. So now we're going to do our area equals length times width. And our length is 1 3/4. And our width is 1 3/4. And we have to turn them into improper fractions. And when we do that, we get 7/4, because 4 times 1 is 4, plus 3 is 7, times 7/4. And we end up with 49/16. We can't leave it improper. So 16 goes into 49 3 times, which would make 48. There's 1 left over. 3 1/16 inches squared. Next one, when we measure, I'm going to measure the side right here. And when we first measure that side, we see that it is 2 inches. And now we have to flip it so that we can measure the bottom. And when we measure the bottom, we see that it comes out to 2 and 12/16. So we write 2 and 12/16. We don't want to use those big numbers. So we're going to simplify it to 2 and 3/4 inches. And now we're going to do our area equals length times width. And the length is 2 and 3/4 inches. And the width is 2 inches. We have to make that 2 and 3/4 inches improper. So 4 times 2 is 8 plus 3 is 11/4 times 2. We do have to remember there is a 1 under here. So we multiply across, we get 22/4. And 22/4 is equal to 5 2/4. Even when we get to 5 2/4, we need to go back. I'll move this out of the way. 5 2/4 is going to become 5 1/2 square inches. And that's how we measure using customary inches squared. And we find our area equals length times width. So on this next page, we're not going to measure some more because we've done some practice. We're going to move on to this one where we just have to find the area. And when we just have to find the area, we know we need to do length times width. So we're going to write our reminder up here. Area equals length times width. And when we do area equals length times width, we have 1 times 1 1/2. And we keep saying that we can't leave them like that. We need to set it up as 1 times 2 times 1 is 2 plus 1 is 3. 1 times 3/2. And we end up with 3/2, which is the same as 1 1/2. And it's feet squared. So now we look at the next one. We have 1 1/2 times 1 1/2. We can't leave them mixed, so we make it improper, which is 3/2 times 3/2. And when we do that, we end up with 9/4, which is the same as 2 1/4 yards squared. Next, we have 2 1/2 times 1 3/16. We're going to turn them into improper, which would be 5/2 times 19/16. And when we do that, we end up with 95/32. And we can't leave them improper. So instead of leaving it improper, I have to divide 32 into 95, and I end up with 2 31/32 yards squared. And we said we've been focusing now on some word problems. So Hanley's putting a carpet in her house. She wants to carpet her living room, which measures 15 by 12 1/3. And she wants to carpet her dining room, which measures 10 1/4 times 10 1/3. How many square feet to cover both rooms? So we need to find the area of each one. So first we're going to do 15 times 12 1/3. We have to make sure that we set that up, that we're going to do 15 times 37/3. And that would give us 555/3, which would then give us 185 feet squared. So next we're going to figure out for the dining room, which was 10 1/4 times 10 1/3. And when we look at those, we end up with 41/4 times 31/3. And when you multiply those two together, you get 1,271 twelfths. And when we divide that, we end up with 105 and 11 twelfths feet squared. So this is the two rooms separate. In order to figure out how much we need all together, we have to add these two together. And when we add these two together, we end up with 290 and 11 twelfths feet squared. So if we were actually doing this and we were buying this for a house or something, we wouldn't get 11 twelfths. We would end up buying 291 so that we would have enough. Next, Fred cut 9 3/4 inch square of construction paper for an art project. He cut a square from the edge of the big rectangle whose side measured 3 1/4 inches. We want to know the measurement of the small rectangle first. So for the small, we're going to look right here. This is our small one. We see that it is a square and it's 3 1/4 in every direction. So we're finding the area of 3 1/4 times 3 1/4. And when we find the area of 3 1/4 and 3 1/4, what we're really doing is finding that it's 13 fourths times 13 fourths. And when we multiply this all out, we end up with 169 sixteenths. Now we can't leave it improper, so when we turn that, we end up with 10 9 sixteenths inches squared. But now we want to know about the remaining paper. So to figure out the remaining paper, what we're going to do is figure out this whole entire outside, and then we'll take away this little section on the inside. So we're doing 9 3/4 times 9 3/4. And when we do that, we have to turn them into improper fractions. So we know we have 39 fourths times 39 fourths. And we end up with 1,521 sixteenths. We cannot leave it improper, so when we change that, we end up with 95 and 1/16. Now, in order to figure out, this is the whole entire gray space, we want to take out this white space here, which from up above we had figured out was 10 9/16, because we don't need that part. And we're going to subtract. Now we had learned way back in Module 3 that I can't do 1 minus 9. I have to borrow this and make it a 94 and make this a larger number, which is now 17. So we now have 84 and 8/16, which when we simplify would be 84 and 1/2 inches squared. These items should help you with your homework. It's the same process in order to be able to solve these problems.